Hey, and welcome back to the Fully Booked Photographer podcast. And yes, you're right, it's just Jeanine and I again. So we've dumped Brad and Jonathan. I'm only joking. I'm only joking. We haven't.
Only temporary.
Only temporarily. Brad and Jonathan and Ruth and Brad's mum and dad, Stan and Shelley and Steve Saporito. I believe they're in York today, Jeanine. They're. So we were just talking about it's Brad and Ruth's honeymoon, and sort of they're bringing people with them.
It's a unique honeymoon.
It's a unique honeymoon. Maybe there's another honeymoon coming or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, we're here to continue the journey from the last podcast, Jeanine, because we thought we get to tell your whole story in the business of photography in one podcast. How silly of me was that?
Hi, I know. I was just thinking, what were we thinking, Ronan? You and I being able to condense all of that into 30 minutes? Not likely.
No chance. So Jeanine, let's just sort of deep dive into another important aspect of business, right? So on your business journey, right, where you like nearly every photographer we see initially, which was what I call the spray and pray curse, right? That just everyone is your client, and because you want to build your sales and build your business, you think the best strategy is that everyone is your client.
Yes, that was me. Yes, I'm the problem. It's me, to quote Taylor Swift. That was me. And in the beginning, I did photograph everything. I pretty much put up my shingle, went to chamber events, joined a BNI group, and I was like, I'm a photographer. Hire me. I'll photograph whatever you want. And, people would ask me, can you photograph this? And I would say yes. And then I'd figure out how to do it. Right. And so I just knew I wanted to run a studio, and I love photography. I didn't really know. I didn't have a why yet. I didn't have a niche. I didn't find any of that in the very beginning. I didn't find it for a few years, actually. And the only thing I did know is after my stint in having the studio in Atlanta, I did not want to photograph weddings anymore. And I pretty much knew that. And so it became I am everything but a wedding photographer. And I know people who are opposite of that, right? They love weddings and don't want to do portraits. So that was the only thing I did know right from the beginning. I knew I didn't want to do weddings or events. I wanted to photograph in the studio or on location with children and family. That was about it. That's pretty much all I knew. But in that realm, I would do anything.
So you just mentioned a couple of things there, that description. So you mentioned ideal client, and you mentioned why, right? Your why, your purpose. So, what comes first? The ideal client or the why?
Well, it's like the chicken and the egg. It's interesting because I think my why, my ideal client, I think I figured out my ideal client first. For me, and I think other people we have talked to have done this differently, but for me, I started learning who my ideal client was. And those were the books that I was reading at the time. I was reading client satisfaction books. I was reading How to Find Your Ideal Client. I was reading Pumpkin Plan. I was reading books like that, trying to figure out how to narrow down my ideal client. No, I think when I was in this journey, it was way before the whole Simon Sinek and the why, right? I didn't even know what that was. I had no idea that there was such thing as finding your why and finding your purpose other than like a religious experience. And we're not going to go there in this podcast. So it was really just focusing on who is my ideal client and who did I want to photograph. BNI was very much about that too. Like, who is your ideal client avatar? They had a different word for it. But every business thing I'd ever learned was trying to figure out who you were marketing to and being able to fully describe them. Now, what was interesting was in the beginning, like through BNI and a lot of those other education books that I was reading, it was a lot of superficial qualifications, like what car do they drive? What school do they go to? What kind of purse do they carry? What clothing brands do they wear? It was all very superficial, never to the core of who that person was. So that was a little bit of a journey for me, learning that it really came down to, for me, I figured out some of the stuff was superficial. Like for me, it turned out that and I learned this, again, trial and error. I thought, in the beginning, I want to photograph children. I need stay-at-home moms. I'll go to events at the mall during like 10 o'clock on a Wednesday because the stay-at-home moms will be there with their kids and I can market the studio. or to mommy's play groups and things like that. I did a lot of mommy's play groups in the beginning and joined them because I had a young child and thought I'd be able to market. What I found out really fast was stay-at-home moms were not my ideal client at all. And so I didn't resonate with them because I was a working mom. That probably had a lot to do with it. And also stay-at-home moms at the time were really big into scrapbooking. And remember, this was about 15 years ago, right? So they were really big into scrapbooking. They were really big into crafting their own memories and things like that. So that does not bode well for a photographer who wants them to buy prints and portraits from me, right? They just wanted to be able to do it themselves. They were looking for someone to teach them how to take better photos of their kids. They weren't looking for someone to do it for them because they had plenty of time. They were looking for things to do to fill their days with activities for their kids. They weren't so busy that they needed someone else to do it. So that's when I quickly learned that a working mom was my ideal client. I resonated with them, and they were someone who worked so many hours that they needed someone else to do these tasks for them. They hired professionals to clean their house. They hired professionals, some of them private chefs, to like cook meals for their families, you know? And so why not hire a professional photographer to also photograph their family and keep those moments going, along as their children were growing. So that was the only superficial thing I would say. In the end, what I really started finding out was it didn't matter how much money they had. It was how much they valued their family. And so I had wealthy clients that would walk through the door who didn't value, that's a dangerous thing to say. I think everybody values their family. I don't want to come across that there are people who don't love their children. That's not what I'm trying to say, but I'm just trying to say like they value certain things over time together. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to, that was a bad way to say it. But like someone who would prefer to have blank walls because they like the clean look as opposed to pictures of their children on their walls and art. Like that's not the family that's going to take a thumbtack and put their kids' latest artwork up on the wall, right? I want the family that's going to put their kids' latest artwork up on the wall because they would rather display their kids' art than have a blank, clean looking space in their home. So for me, it was those who came in and all they wanted to do was spend their spare time that they weren't working or weren't traveling with their children. And so that's where I found out to be like, who is it that value, like, where can I find people that value their kids and value time together as a family? And money didn't matter. I've had clients who pretty much were on food stamps and all of their money that they spent their discretionary spending money, they spent on photographs. I've had clients, middle class, upper middle class, wealthy. The amount of money, while it might be easier, the more money they have to spend, it doesn't necessarily give them the permission to spend. I don't know if that makes sense. So I've not found income necessarily to be a driving factor. It's whether they're working and whether they value time with their kids and creating moments and memories with their kids. So like, for example, I'll tell you, one of the superficial things that I have found, clients that have annual passes to the theme parks around here are almost all of my clients do. Like it's like 99%. They either have season passes to Disney, SeaWorld, Universal, Busch Gardens. We have all and so these are people who like to go and do things with their kids. And so those are the types of things. And that's what I was able to figure out.
So there's a lot of lessons in what you've just said in the last 8 minutes.
Sorry.
But no, it's good.
You get me talking, Ronan. It's hard to get the microphone back.
It's all great. But let's just go over them just in case, just to deep dive a little bit more. So here's what I heard, right? What I heard was that initially your ideal client, what you were taught, what you were reading, what B and I were teaching was more around demographics rather than psychographics. So it was all about where your client hung out and where they went and all that. And we're not saying that's not important, right? But we've also got to understand the psychographics. And what you've identified is that, your clients, they like to celebrate the time they spend together as a family, whether that's with the children on their own playing or whatever that is, that there's a lot going on there. And I think you actually give an example of when you're doing your first birthdays, right? One of your qualifying questions for a client is, what are the first birthday plans? Because that the mom who is planning to have an amazing first birthday party is emotionally attached to that, while the mom who isn't doing that is not going to be emotionally attached as much to professional photographs of their 1-year-old's first birthday, right?
That is correct. Yeah. That is one of the things we identified. And because the amount of planning that goes into planning an elaborate first birthday, as the mom that has a Pinterest board with the theme and she's collecting things and she's working months in advance, crafting things for the party, hiring people for the party, catering, decorations. And so that when they're that invested in the planning of a one-day event to celebrate their child's first birthday, those would be the same moms that would be invested in the idea of a first birthday portrait to also celebrate that first milestone.
So that approach is nearly blending the demographics with the psychographics, in that the reason why mum is buying this stuff for and planning the birthday is because of her desire and the emotional desire to celebrate the baby's first birthday, right? That important milestone.
Yes.
So that's where they link. So we're not saying you don't do the demographics. Of course you do. But there's a reason why you need to question why those demographics are important, right? You also hit on a really important point about money and budget. And of course, people need to have money to invest, right? But I hear this all the time from photographers, because often we hear, oh no, I'm only after the millionaires, or I'm only after the people with loads of money. And maybe for certain types of photography, that might be relevant. But often they're the people who actually value different things. They actually value more their status and their ego. And it's about, the artwork that's on the wall by a particular famous artist, or it's about the Ferrari that they're driving, rather than celebrating the emotional connection they have to families. And that's a very broad statement. I know I don't want to paint everyone with the same brush.
I know you still said it better than I did, though. I was trying to say it. I didn't say it very well, so I'm glad you took a stab at it.
So, and we're not saying that's the case with everybody, right? Who's got a lot of money, but it tends to be a trend or a thread that we see through that avatar. So you have to be absolutely clear about this, that yes, we need to be able to have a process to ensure that there is money to be invested. But we shouldn't use the criteria necessarily of, well, they have to have X amount of money. And that's a balance, I know. And I know we're not giving you the solution to that here, because there is no solution. You figure that out over time, right, Jeanine?
Right. That was the purpose of this podcast, right? It was my journey and how I figured things out from my studio over time.
Yeah. And the other thing is, with regards to money, is, if both parents are working, well, the chances are, right, that they have money to invest, provided they haven't spent it all on other stuff or built up a lot of debt or all that. You never know that, but don't get hung up on the money thing, is basically the lesson from it. Be aware of it, but don't use that as a sole criteria. So you talked, Jeanine, about the connection with your why and your purpose, and that your ideal client came first, right? And here's a question for you, right? When you look back, let's say all that was there, that Simon Sinek was around then, and it was about developing your why and your purpose and your passion and leading that into your mission statement. Do you think you would have discovered your ideal client earlier if you knew your why earlier?
I do. And it's interesting because I kind of feel like there was a lot of wasted time in the growth of the business because I didn't understand that. And I spent a lot of time chasing genres, chasing what other people were doing with their studios, because I didn't truly understand my why. I didn't even know what it was. So I think, had I known that much sooner, Simon Sinek, why didn't you do that TED Talk like 10 years earlier? Had I heard that sooner, I mean, when I heard that, man, light bulbs just went off. And I didn't figure out my why right away, but I realized I had to. And I realized the importance of it. And I realized how amazing Steve Jobs actually was, which I already knew anyways. But because he's, in all the other business books I had read, they use him for a lot of examples. But God, had I figured out my why sooner, it would have saved a lot of failures or miss attempts at different things in the studio because I wouldn't have even attempted them. I would have been like, nope, that doesn't fit my why. Nope, that's not who I am. Nope, that doesn't go with the mission of the studio. And I would never have even taken my focus off of the ultimate goal and the ultimate mission of the studio to try those things. But it's one of those things. Business is trial and error, and no failure is actually a failure. It's just it's a way to learn. But I think I could have saved myself a lot of those mini failures had I known my why sooner.
So Jeanine, what you're saying is, like, when you're considering your ideal client, which is advice we give to our clients nearly all the time, the Fully Booked Photographer, is if you're really stuck, just look in a mirror and write your story, right?
Right.
And just write your story about yourself. And Simon Sinek has a process about that when he's saying, when he suggests a process to find your why, right? So once you understand why, you need to have a why in the first place, right? So make sure you read his book on that. And then once you understand that and you understand the reasons why, well, then it's really good then to go through a process of finding your why. But he gets you to, and we help our clients with this in the Fully Booked Photographer. You've to write down 10 stories of your life. So 10 stories at different stages of your life, not all current ones. You go back in time as well, and you write down 10 stories that meant something to you. And then you find somebody who's a good active listener to listen to those stories and identify common themes in that. And then that helps you get your why. And we did a podcast, and it wasn't planned, Jeanine. You might remember when we discussed your why before. And I asked you some questions, but the reason why I was able to ask you those questions at the time was because of all the stories you've told me over the last number of years. Because as a team, we meet every single day, right? It's the Fully Booked Photographer team for an hour. And as much as that is figuring out content and challenges that our Fully Booked members are having, they help inform us as a team as well, and we all learn from each other on that too. So I had, I suppose, already had an insight to some of your stories, right, through that process before that podcast happened, and I don't know how we drifted into it, but we did drift into it, and
you made me cry.
I made you cry, not on purpose. That wasn't the purpose of it, but that shows that you're starting to discover your why, right? Because as Sinek teaches us, your why comes from a part of the brain that can't verbalize. But we can write stories. So if someone then can listen to those stories and find common themes, we start to help you verbalize your why, right? And that's where it comes from. So, when we're talking to our clients, right, part of what we try and do is discover their why. Like, why is this important to capture in portraits? Why is this important to celebrate in portraits? And the same thing happens, because if you try and discover their why by asking them why, they can't verbalize that either, right? So we have to have a process of having a conversation and getting them to tell us some story so that we can use that to help determine what their actual why is. So it's interesting, that piece. And when you connect that dot with your own why, with your client why, and how that feeds into your ideal client avatar, it's a fascinating triangle of discovery and understanding. And you have to have that. You have to have that in order to truly deliver a transformational experience, in my opinion. What do you think?
No, I totally agree. And, I can give 2 specific examples in the past of we're not understanding that why we tried something and why it didn't resonate. And a trap that I see a lot of our photographers in general, but especially our members, fall into. And that's, you go to a workshop, a convention, you listen to a speaker who's very charismatic or not. Sometimes they're not even charismatic. They just have a good idea and they talk about how it saved their studio. And you think, oh, I need to do that. It'll save my studio, or I'll make so much more money. And so when you don't have a why to connect and resonate to, you'll just try it. And so, great example. Right when the beauty portraits really started coming on strong in the industry, I was like, oh, I photograph moms with their kids. I photograph children. Clearly, I have moms as clients. This would be ideal. I should do this. I should add beauty portraits into what we're offering. And it's going to make so much money for the studio because I'm opening up this whole other line of photography. And so, I mean, I did everything the right way. You know, I brought in clients, I did sample trials, I brought them in for sales sessions, and we in the beginning, and I launched a whole new website, like all of those things. And it fell flat for me. Not because the clients weren't coming in, they were, and I was booking them. I just didn't like it. And I didn't have a passion for it. I'm not, as we can tell if anybody watches the YouTube video, as opposed to just the podcast, I am a jeans and t-shirt type of person. I'm not a glamorous person. All the beauty portrait photographers that I end up running into, they like to glam up. They like to walk around. Like, that's just who they are, and they like to see that side of people. I am more of a get down on the floor in yoga pants and play with children type of person. And very casual. Even when I go out with my friends, it's still very casual. So the beauty side of things never resonated with me. It wasn't something that I ever found passion in for myself. It wasn't. And so it wasn't me. And because it wasn't me, and my why, as I was starting to develop it at that time, really all resonated around children and the growth of children and going through life. And that's my why, right? Going through life with my clients. And so I realized quickly, this isn't me. And so I shut it all down and plus realized that it's really hard to focus on two specifically very different niches. It's very hard to focus on glamour and beauty in the same studio that focuses on fun things for kids. Because when you walk into the studio, is it going to be children or is it going to be beauty? And, so all of the stuff that makes our studio fun for kids, like toys and little tables and little animals, like all these things that invite children in, that's not going to invite in a woman looking for glamour. Right. So it was this thing that just didn't mix, and I didn't get it until I didn't get it. The other one would be painted portraits for us. I was in a mastermind group, and everyone on my mastermind group was starting to do painted portraits. They had attended courses on it. They had gone to Texas school for weeks and had done trainings with some of the best painted portrait photographers in the country. And Jeanine, you can't make money unless you do painted portraits. It's the way to go. You have to do painted portraits. You photograph children. Add painted portraits into your mix. So I spent time to learn how to do this, and I found the vendors to do it. And I started offering it in the studio. And again, I was like, I offered it, and then I was like, it's still not me. Like, I am about fun, interactive. Like, I don't know. It's just, for me, it was a different place, and paintings just weren't for me. And actually, when I figured out, like, my clients aren't going to hang paintings in their homes either. That's just not my client. And so while we actually do still have it as an offering, if people want to, because we do have some very traditional clients who might want something like that, we offer it, but it's not something I market for, and it's not something I shoot for. But that was another quick thing that I had to learn. I was like, just because painted portraits resonate with so many photographers in the industry, it does not resonate with me. I really much prefer like the magical, like crisp metal, like in your face, looks like a movie screen, contrasted, like those types of images really resonate with me more and with what I'm creating than the classic oil painting. And so it's just one of those things. It's like just because it's right for so many people doesn't mean it's right for you. And when you understand your why, then you can go to those conferences and be like, that's nice. I'll happily, as my friend, help you figure out how to do that really well in your studio. I'm not doing it in mine. But take the lessons that I learned from that and then use it in how I want to promote my photography and the products that I offer to my clients. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you've made a whole load of points there. And the first point you made was that many of the educators you talk about probably don't fully understand Cynic yet either, because they led with the result being make more money by doing painted portraits, rather than what the impact the painted portraits can have on a particular client avatar type. And by making that difference and truly transforming their lives with that work, that the end result will be the money, which cynic teaches us all, right? So even with the lead of that suggests, and you only know what you know, right? You don't know what you don't know. So I'm not in any way criticizing them, but it is something to consider, right? That the money is a result. And yes, that might be a main driver for you for whatever reason, but you've got to figure out why this is important to the client and why this is important to you. And why do you want to create painted portraits for a client? And it's an interesting, because we see this all the time. Like, you even hear, this the saying, there's riches in the niches, and everyone thinks the riches are about money, right? It's not. It's about rich relationships. It's about having rich relationships with your clients. The end result will be money, but it's the rich relationships. And when your clients regard you as friends, they want to come back over and over and over again because of the value you bring to them as this friendship, as this business. That's when the riches or the money come in money form. But if you lead with that, often it can derail us. What do you think?
No, I agree. And it's interesting, and as we've been doing this podcast, I keep thinking about the which came first and the whole chicken and egg analogy, because that going through life with your clients, like, they come in over and over again, they become family, they become your friends. That's where my joy comes from. And that is what helps build it over time. And it's interesting because it does fuel the studio, and it fuels my passion, and it fuels what I innovate for them. Like, reasons to have them keep coming back over and over again. How do I change things? What do I keep the same? Because that's part of it too. Like, some of the things you have to keep the same because they want to duplicate things for multiple children over time. But you still have to innovate and push things forward as well. So no, I do. And it's one of those things. This is why your why is so important. That might not be everybody's why. Some people might want to create a one-time finished piece of artwork and never see the client again. And that's not me. And so, but that doesn't make it wrong. It doesn't make any person's why right or wrong. It just makes it their why. And it makes it their reason for doing business. And so, but you got to realize, and I think it's probably the point you're trying to make, like, depending on what it is that you do and the reason why you have your why, it will affect your marketing, and it will affect your revenue, and it will affect how you bring business into your studio. So the beauty of what the way the money flows for our studio is that I don't have to find new clients all the time. 80% of the business I do is for my existing clients, and they come in over and over and over again. I don't have to every year constantly go out and find new clients. And so I have obviously my first birthdays, that's where I get my new clients. So I get my new clients in when they turn 1, and then I bring them back in over and over and over again. I bring them back in for Christmas. I bring them back in for spring baby ducks. I bring them back in for the theme portraits we offer throughout the year. And then for their toddler milestone birthdays. And then they grow. And then this year, it was amazing. It was my first high school senior portrait I did from a newborn. And we cried. She hugged me, Ronan. She hugged me, and she's like, Miss Jeanine, this has been so much fun. I can't wait for you to photograph my baby someday. Notice she didn't say wedding. My clients know not to ask me about weddings. But anyways, we cried and she hugged. And how special is that? That this 17-year-old girl hugged me and cried because I have photographed her since she was born.
And that's an example of the rich relationships, and
yeah.
And I know you're using the word why. Your why is to go through life with your clients, right? Well, that's how you deliver on your why, rather than it's connected to your why, right? Because we have our why and how we deliver on it and what we do. But and I'm not gonna deep dive
Don't
in this.
Do it, Ronan. Don't make me do it.
But that's not really the why. That's the how.
That's the how
you deliver on your why, right?
Yes, it is.
So and they are connected. Why you do it, how you do it, and what you actually do. So and the reason for that difficulty is it's hard for us to verbalize our why, right? So that's why we often default to our how and our what rather than our why. But you also made another great point, because you mentioned this in our last podcast. I'm dangerous, Jeanine. I go back in time too, But you mentioned in your last podcast about being something that you always desired to be, right? Which was an Imagineer. Is that right, for Disney?
Yes.
So if you think about that and that being a goal, right, and the fact that it was no longer an option because of a business strategy change of Disney, right? You're now following through on that today too. So all those deep desires and goals you have for yourself, you're now doing it, except you're not doing it for Disney, you're doing it for yourself. Have you ever thought about that?
I have thought about that, actually. And I came to that realization a few years ago. A lot of mine, this is why telling your stories is so important. At one point in college, I actually thought about changing my major from mechanical engineering to animation because I loved the concept of creating these animations. Now, look, I'm using Photoshop and other pieces of software with my team to add animations and effects to children's portraits, right? So how full circle have I come, And so, yeah, no, I've thought about this, like our wizarding sessions, so many of our immersive experience sessions for our kids. That's essentially what I'm doing for them. I'm creating a little mini Disney experience, essentially. They're coming in and they're being immersed into this world, right? I just wish I had Disney's budget to fully, wouldn't it be great, every theme to fully transform the studio and the wall, everything like that. But we do what we can. And so I channel that. I channel that wanting to provide that when we, and I mean it, it's in my about me, but when we open the doors to the studio, it's a magical experience for the children. I want them to walk in and I want them to experience magic when they walk in the door. We do dinosaur sessions. There's dinosaur footprints coming from the door back to the studio. I want them to, as soon as they step in, they get excited and they want to be there and they're feeling the transformation of what they're about to do and allow their imaginations to take over. And that's really what I want for children. So yes, it is. It is a little bit of that Disney and that creation and that Imagineering. I couldn't do it for them, so I'm doing it for me and I'm doing it for my clients. And I think it's just as special that way. And it's just taking what I had wanted to do and now doing it a different way. And I didn't know it actually until it was these exercises. And I was like, look at this. So I'm kind of doing exactly what I wanted to do, 30 years ago. I'm just now doing it this way with my own clients. And that's why it resonates with me. That's why creating these posters and these albums and these storybooks and these magical elements added to their images and going so big and over the top with the theatrics is what I gravitate to, because that's a little bit of who I always have been.
So I can't believe that the time has gone again on this podcast.
Oh my gosh, how do we do this, Ronan? There's so much more to say.
I know there is, but I'm sure we'll get a chance again to deep dive further. So I've really enjoyed the conversations over this podcast and the last podcast, Jeanine. Guys, if you've really enjoyed it too, and you want to know more, so there's two ways to do that, right? Hit the subscribe button below so that you get notified of all of our podcasts. And the second thing is click on the link to go to our 30-day challenge, where you can deep dive more into these concepts with the whole fully booked photographer mentor team. That's Jonathan, Brad, Jeanine, and myself. So for today, for this podcast, bye for now. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys. This has been fun. I've enjoyed chatting about the various aspects of the business journey.
See you soon.
Bye, guys.